Hello and welcome to Istio Weekly. Thank you all for joining. Um, Last week, apropos of the subject today, Kelsey Hightower tweeted praise for the Tetrate Istio Certified Administrator exam, saying, quote, as a big believer in IT certifications, it's nice to see an Istio certification program launched by the Tetrate team. And we couldn't agree more. So, as I said, apropos, today we have a special guest, Vijay Nadkarni of Sloan Street Consulting, who joins us to discuss his experience taking the exam, his preparations for it, and the role IT certifications play in his technology journey. We'll have dedicated time for Q&A after the presentation, so if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get them answered. But first, as we always do, before diving into today's topic, I'll take a minute to cover some recent highlights of the mesh world. And as always, see the show notes in the description below for details and links. On August 24th, Istio released patches to the 1.9, 1.10, and 1.11 lines to mitigate CVEs described in the latest security bulletin, Istio Security 2021-008. See the release announcements for 1.9.8, 1.10.4, 1.11.1, respectively, for details on the CVEs addressed, specific code changes, and what to do before you upgrade. The CVEs addressed include possible ways to bypass Istio authorization policy or cause incomplete authorization policy checks under certain circumstances. Others include vulnerabilities that can cause Envoy to terminate abnormally or cause excessive CPU consumption. So, as always, it's great to see robust and active reporting and patching of vulnerabilities from the Istio community. And finally, we want to hear from you. What else is happening in the service mesh world? What topics would you like us to cover here? Please leave your thoughts in the comments to the video and at GitHub. And as always, links for all of the resources and more can be found in the description. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Peter.
All right, thank you, Ryan. So today we'll talk about how to become a certified Istio expert. But before we go to our special guest today, I just want to spend a couple of minutes beforehand, just talk about what is the CIAT exam. So CIAT stands for Certified Istio Administrator by Tetrate. It is an online exam that consists of a set of performance-based problems that you as a candidate need to solve in a command line environment. What that means is during the exam, you get access to a virtual machine that has Kubernetes and Istio installed, and you will be presented with a set of different problems that you need to solve. For example, there might be multiple workloads running in the cluster, and you need to configure different traffic routing patterns between them. Or you need to configure authorization policies or resiliency features, and so on. Now, in addition to these practical hands-on problems, there's also a set of multiple choice questions you have to answer. However, the majority of the exam is based on the performance-based problems that you have to solve. Of course, you're only going to have 2 hours to complete the exam as well. So typically, one of the first questions that people ask about, like when they hear about this exam, is what's on the exam, right? So what do I need to know in order to prepare for the exam and, of course, to pass the exam? So the slide shows a high-level breakdown of categories of problems and questions you can expect in the exam. Now, the majority of the performance-based problems or questions are related to traffic management. So things like splitting traffic, using subsets, and so on. The other categories are resiliency and fault injection, and then security, of course. In the exam, we also cover the installation and upgrade scenarios, as well as some more advanced scenarios. Now, as you can see that from this slide, like exam does cover pretty much all aspects of Istio and the majority of Istio features that are available. Now, in order to prepare for the exam, we have prepared a set of materials you can use. Now, the first one is our Istio Fundamentals course. So this is the free course. It's 3+ hours, I think. It covers all the Istio fundamentals. It is a text and video course, and it also includes practical labs that show you how you can put that theory into practice. So it is a guided course that takes you from the beginning through all the Istio features, and it is a really, really good resource you can use to prepare for the exam. Next one is, of course, Istio documentation. There's a lot of topics covered in the documentation, of course. And there's also a lot of examples that you can go through and try them on your own. Finally, there's also numerous blogs that talk about Istio and go through some practical topics and explain them. And all of these are really good materials to prepare for the exam. Now, in terms of the tools and what you can use during the exam. So in the exam environment, as I said, it is a virtual machine that you'll get connected to. The proctor will help you connect to the machine. On that machine, you'll have Visual Studio Code. You'll have a terminal window. It's a Linux machine. It's a Linux box. You'll have Kubernetes CLI, of course, and Istio CLI installed. And you will also have access during the exam. You'll have access to Istio documentation and the Tetrate block. So it can help you remember the format of the resources, because it's not realistic from anyone to expect someone to know how all the objects and resources look like. So with that, let's welcome Vijay. Hey Vijay, how you doing?
Hi, Peter. Thank you for having me over.
Awesome.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi,
Thank you for having
Vijay.
me over.
Maybe can you give us a little bit of your background, like who you are, what you're up to?
Sure. So, I started my career in tech, and so after doing my computer engineering from UT Austin, I went back to India and worked at a VC-backed tech company called ATM Systems, where I developed multimedia applications on embedded systems. So really, very close to the metal. So the product line that I was working on was in-flight entertainment systems. So it's the video on demand devices that you see in front of you in the airplane seat. And we had a really high market share from all of these OEMs that have brought us business. And at ATM I worked on sort of encoders and decoders for video, for example, the H.264 codecs. And this was very, very optimized for the Texas Instruments digital signal processing chips. So very, very interesting work back then. After this, I moved out of tech for some years, where I worked at VC-backed companies again in the food and beverages space. So I helped Accel-funded food brand grow across India, and then a Sequoia-backed beverages company across the US, Asia Pacific, and the UK. So I have had them grow through those geographies. I've since moved back into tech, and currently I'm sort of running a small consulting firm based in London.
Nice. So you went tech, non-tech, and then back to tech again. So you could not live without tech.
Yeah.
That's
I missed the action.
Yeah. That's awesome. Like you worked on, you said airplanes, like the displays and everything.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
That was very, very exciting work. At ATM.
Yeah. It's always like I was never close to that that part of the industry, right? So it's always interesting. I used to work with a person who they worked on, I think, helicopters or something, right? So he was actually in QA, so he was testing helicopters. I was like, first thing, what was the worst bug, right? It's like, well, we got the helicopter up and then it fell down, right? So during testing, of course, no one was injured or anything, but probably a lot of money went to waste there. But anyway, so what got you into Istio? Like what get you, like how did you started with Istio, I guess with Kubernetes, even cloud native?
Right. So, when I got back into tech, I wanted to sort of explore where I'd left things off. And this time I wanted to sort of make a shift into the IT and infra and that space of side of things instead of DSP. So, once I got deeper into Kubernetes, I think I heard Varun Talwar on a podcast. I think it was Tech Talks podcast or a New Stack podcast or something. And when I heard that podcast, I sort of got more and more interested in into Istio, and sort of that took me deeper into this journey into Istio. So literally, I got in touch with a few folks at Tetrate, and I think Prasad at Tetrate told me about the certification, and that's how I decided to explore more about the certification.
Nice. So Prasad reached out. You reached out directly to us, huh?
Yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
actually reached out to Peter as well before I did the certification.
Yeah. So that's, I think what we can draw from this is, if you want to be on YouTube, you can reach out to us
and we'll put you on YouTube.
And we'll put you on YouTube. Yeah.
It's hard to get on YouTube.
Yeah, it's very hard. Yeah. That's awesome. That's all. Orion, you want to go and?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, what was the time span, right? Like, what is the time period we're talking about when you started with Istio, and then when you decided to get certified and actually got certified? Do you know what that was?
Not that long. Where I think there's about a month or 2 months from the time longer than a month. So about 2 months between sort of finding out about, getting more and more interested in Istio, and then signing up for the certification. But I didn't make it on my first attempt. It is a very difficult exam to crack. So after the first attempt, I sort of took a cooling off period for a couple of weeks, and then I tried it again.
So how do you approach this kind of thing? Like, you're going from like a standstill to getting to expert. Like, what do you do like to prep?
What do I do to prepare?
Well, learning new technologies, because obviously if you're going from DSP to Istio, that's there's not a lot of domain overlap.
Right. So, in fact, I use certification programs like this one. One good thing about the tech industry, among the many, is the number of certification programs that are out there. If you know what you want to learn and what you want to achieve, then there's definitely a certification program for it. And the good thing is you can use these to give you a good path and a structured sort of systematic approach, or a systematic path to learning new topics. And that's how I think of certification programs. I mean, people usually think of it as something that you can put on your resume. I think of them as a way to sort of ensure that I learn new technologies and in some level of depth.
So it's almost like,
besides this, I sort of learn best by doing.
Certificate-driven learning in a way, right?
Yeah.
If I can, yeah, I'm thinking it's actually a really good idea. Like, if I wanted to learn about, I don't know, machine learning, because I know nothing zero about it, right? Signing up for an actual, like, an exam with a training program would be a really, it's not a bad idea to go about it that way, right? Because in a way you're kind of forced, right, to go through, because you know that there's that exam that you have to take.
Right.
So it's a really interesting approach. Now, in terms of that, what did you actually do to prepare for the exam? What were some of the things that you used, and how did you try to prepare for it?
Right. So, for this particular exam, my first port of call was Istio Fundamentals, because, it covers all of the topics. You've covered all of the topics it's on academy.tetrate.io, and it's about 3 hours of video tutorials, like you mentioned. The quizzes at the end of each module, sort of make sure you check your understanding, and at the end of that, you get a Istio Fundamentals certification. Now, with the good part is what I liked with this certification program was you do get a practice test when you sign up for it, and the test environment is pretty much the same. At the terminal, the VS Code, exactly the same test environment. The questions, I would say, are the same or similar difficulty level. And the other good thing is you get 2 attempts. And I think you need it. I mean, I needed it. It's quite a tough exam to crack. Besides this, there are tons of YouTube videos. In fact, I'm sort of in the process of putting up a couple of videos. I've put up a couple of videos on introducing Istio, and I'm sort of thinking of going deeper in and adding a lot more. The Istio Weekly series is a really good place to sort of go deeper in and into more advanced topics, which I think is not covered in the scope of the exam, but it's really, really interesting to sort of dive in. The other good resource was the documentation. I mean, the documentation for Istio is really, really good. And what I would recommend is sort of going into the examples, trying them out, and you have to ultimately try this out on an actual Kubernetes cluster. So what I did was I initially started off with a sort of a mini cube on my Mac, but then I wanted to sort of get a feel for what a more complex app would feel like, a microservices application would feel like. So I regularly set up clusters on EKS on AWS, and multi-node clusters there to get a feel for that.
I have to ask, what was the hardest part of the exam?
I think time is really critical during the exam.
Okay.
And like I said, I didn't pass the first time around.
No, that's a good point. Time management.
Yeah. I mean, with any exam, you're bound to get a few questions wrong. But if you're going to miss some questions, then that can be tough. So it's important, I think, with this particular exam. It's similar to the CKA, which I've also done. It's similar to the CKA in the sense that it's practicals. You have access to a terminal and you solve problems. So what I like about that format is it really tests, whether you're familiar with the technology. Are you able to solve problems? Are you able to think on your feet, and things like that? So it's I thought very crucial to sort of understand Istio configuration really well, whether it's traffic management or security policies, and it's important to understand and be very familiar with the YAML for different Istio resources.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned, like, I don't think it's realistic from anyone to expected people to know all the YAML without referring to anything. That's why you have access to Istio.io, to the docs, right? But on the other hand, people might think, oh, I have access to docs and all the examples. That's going to be easy, but it's really not, right? Because 2 hours, right? It's 2 hours. There's a proctor, right? There's someone who's actually watching your every move, right? I mean, it adds to the stress, right? So don't one thing and we'll go through the tips a little bit later, right? Is that learn how to use documentation well as well. That's a good tip. Also, can you, for people who haven't done CKA or the Kubernetes exams and haven't done this one, can you just briefly explain what was the process of you scheduled your exam and then comes the exam day? What was the process like?
During the exam, I would say it's really important to sort of plan your time. I found that it was sort of better for me to tackle sort of security and those questions and installation before getting into traffic management. But that's not necessarily the case for everybody. I mean, your mileage may vary. You might feel traffic management is a topic that you're really, really good at. You don't need to sort of refer to documentation to see the YAML structure each time. Then you should probably go through that. And but what I would suggest is, for people taking the test, is the exam is certainly, definitely finish one section before moving on to another one. Because let's say you're working on the security section, and you have the YAML in your mind. It's fresh in your mind for authorization policies or for peer authentication. You want to finish those questions while it's still fresh in your mind before you move on to traffic management, or before you move on to any other section, for example, advanced questions, or
avoid context switching.
Exactly. Because there's a lot of context. There's a lot of YAML that you'll have to go through.
So if there was like one thing you wish you knew before going into the exam, what would that be?
I would say the practice exam, the practice test, is, well, the environment is the same, and the difficulty level of the questions is very similar. The pressure on time is not the same. I mean, it's much easier to sort of rely on. You could do the practice test, rely on the Istio documentation for the YAML and for any other questions that you have, and you will still have time to spare. But that won't be the case with the exam. You'll really be under a lot of time pressure, because it tests you on how quick you are to sort of think on your feet and what solutions you can come up with.
Right. Cool. Well, that's good advice. I still actually have to go through this whole thing, so I'm taking notes. Anyway, like, what other technologies are you currently interested in? Like, what do you think you're gonna take on next?
I am sort of interested in Envoy, and I'd love to get deeper into it and to explore it in a lot more detail. I'm also interested in security, so I'm sort of learning right now about hardening Kubernetes host nodes and hardening Kubernetes clusters and so on. So yeah.
Did Peter tell you he's doing an Envoy fundamentals?
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah. Am I?
So look for.
Am I?
Oh, you didn't know?
I guess I am. Yeah. Yeah. We are coming up with something very, very soon. So it'll be.
Right.
It's exciting for me to learn about it as well, more in depth. But it's a completely different beast compared to Istio. Any, like, thinking about tips, any like top 3 things that you want to like give as tips to
I think one thing that comes to mind is and this is sort of getting into the weeds in the YAML, but I think all of the Istio resources have most of them are namespace scoped. So it's important to make sure you're actually specifying your namespace in the YAML, because I know I made this mistake the first time around, and I ended up creating Istio resources in the default namespace instead of the one that was specified. And so you could at least you may not have time to test all your answers, but you could at least do a simple kubectl get command to check if your resource has actually been created in the right namespace. Some of the questions I think you could actually test throughout and see if it actually works out or not. So you could create test pods. You could create a pod to curl in an infinite loop and to generate traffic. You could create an Nginx or an HTTPD pod and to respond to that traffic. So to some extent you could do that, but you won't have. I don't think you would have time to sort of test out all of the solutions.
Yeah, that's a good point on the namespaces. I think I did see that a couple of times where people might have actually come up with the correct answer, right? But it wasn't like It wasn't in the namespace, right? It wasn't in the right namespace, and I think, if I remember correctly, majority of the performance-based questions, you could actually test them out. There are like actual workloads and everything running that you could go and see if your like traffic split works correctly, or if your policy is set correctly, or whatever it is. By the way, we've also reached out to a bunch of candidates that like passed the exam, to a bunch of experts as well. So I collected a couple of them on the slide, and I think some of them, Vijay, you already mentioned. I think some of them are a bit different from what you mentioned, but I mean, the thing is, it's also personal preference, right? Like someone likes, I think the specific one you said you want to like complete the, let's say, security one before you move on to a different one because you're context switching, right?
Yeah.
I've seen, I think one of the feedbacks or one of the tips here was also like, if you're spending way too much time on something and it's giving you like if you spend like 20 minutes on a single question, maybe it's time for you to like switch to a different one, like move on and then come back to it later. I think the first one here, practice all examples, right, from the course. That makes total sense. You should go through the labs, go through the example. You've also mentioned the practice exam, right?
Yeah.
Just so you can get like the feeling. I don't think it's every day that you work through a browser, right? Connected to a machine. Cross-verify if the solution is working or not. That's a good one for sure. However, you might not have enough time, I think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you go through everything in an hour and you have an hour left, I think it's perfectly valid. Go through and cross-verify. Be calm during the exam. That's easy to say, easier said than done, right? I mean, it's nervousness, right? We're all people, right? You get nervous about things. So there's a question from YouTube. So Varsha's asking, do we have necessary commands in case of switching different clusters? Yes. So the commands are provided to you on how to switch contexts, for example, right? So you don't necessarily have to spend time chasing that down. But yeah, one tip that I would add is, and I think that adds to people being a little bit nervous and everything during the exam. So be calm, but also read the instructions, right? Read the instructions for every question because all the information that you need is there, right? So the namespace names are there, right? Like all of those things are there. I get it. It's very, very easy to like completely forget, right? Like you're focused on solving the problem. It's very easy to forget the -n and specify the namespace. Well, that brings me to make sure you use the right Kubernetes context, right? Which is also a good one. There is multiple Kubernetes clusters. Familiarize yourself with the docs and references section. Again, you have access to everything. It's just you're not going to have time to like hunt for stuff, right? Like at least know the high level things, right? Know where to look up different schemas. Comfortable using Istio CLI, time conscious, skip questions, right, that seem initially difficult, and then come back. You can use alias for kubectl and Istio CTL. Like you have access to the terminal, like you can do any aliases you want if it helps you, of course. You can also enable command completion, right? Anything, Vijay, that you think we didn't mention or we missed, or you want to like?
No, I think we covered pretty much all of it. I thought, practicing is the best way to sort of prepare for this. You have to sort of try out, as many different scenarios as you can. Practice them on a cluster that you can get hold of, whether it's on the public cloud or if you set up Minikube at home, or either way. But it's absolutely crucial to sort of try out and practice as many different scenarios to prepare for this.
Yeah, and on like in terms of, I think you mentioned earlier as well, right? Trying stuff out on a real cluster, like a cloud managed cluster.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely helpful because it's the real world environment in a way. Minikube, Kind, and any of other things are good as well. However, the issues that I was always running into when, like, I used to do like a lot of workshops in Istio and everything is, oh, we're just going to use Minikube. Oh, well, guess what? Not everyone has a 32 gigabytes of memory, right? And 18 CPUs or whatever. So those things do take, like, they use memory, they take up like CPUs, just Kubernetes alone, right? And then you have to install Istio on top of it, and you have to install some workloads to try things out, right?
Yeah.
There's this YouTuber who uses Raspberry Pis. He's got these big clusters of Raspberry Pis that he runs Kubernetes on.
That's if you have time, and it's a nice project, I guess, to set up.
If you have the time, no kidding, right?
Like,
I'd love to try that out.
Yeah, those, I mean, I think like Raspberry Pis have gotten so even cheaper than they used to be. Like they have the micros or minis now. They're even smaller than the original ones.
Yeah.
It's just like you need like 16 of them or whatever, right?
Yeah, no, he's got this whole rack full of these Raspberry Pis. It's the funniest thing. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah. Orion, do you have any questions for Vijay? Anyone on the stream? If you have questions, ask away. This is your time to ask questions. Orion?
I'm good. I mean, thank you so much, Vijay. This has been super interesting.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And also thanks to Abhishek and Tunde and other experts that were very helpful with providing the list of all these tips that we showed today. I will make this available, these tips. The video will be available, and I'll make the tips available as well on our GitHub. And with that, thanks again, Vijay. And we'll switch to Orion if you want to do the
Okay, I'll do the standard outro.
Yes.
Thanks, Peter, as always, for putting together the presentation. And special thanks to Vijay for joining us and sharing your insights. We hope you all found it useful. And we hope you'll join us in 2 weeks for episode 11 of Istio Weekly. You can find the Istio Weekly schedule as well as past episodes on istioweekly.com. We put tutorial material up on GitHub at github.io/tetratelabs.io/istioweekly. And you can chat with us on the Get Istio channel in the Istio Slack workspace, slack.istio.io, or leave a comment on this video.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.